Hi friends, this is Marilyn from tarotclarity.com, and before I get into the content of today's video, I wanted to take the opportunity to thank you guys for watching my videos. I've been doing this a long time. I've noticed, since 2016 when I started doing videos, that I've recently had a surge in followers and subscribers, and a lot more comments and a lot more thumbs up. So it seems as though in recent months, more people have noticed me, and it's very gratifying, and I appreciate very much that you're present and that you're watching my videos. And it's good for you to give me a thumbs up, because it encourages me to know the content that you like. If you give me a thumbs up in something, or if I get a lot of commenting, and I appreciate the comments immensely, then I know what it is that you're looking for, and then I'll do more of the same, right? So today's video is going to be, I believe, on spreads and how to go about, using a spread, or what spreads to use, or even how to create your own spreads. Before I go off on these tangents, which I'm prone to, I want to give credit to the deck that I'm going to be using for this video, and that is the Inversion Tarot, the artwork by Jody Buginski Barbesi, and it's published by US Game Systems, Inc. Now, this deck, Ms. Barbesi fashioned it in large part, I believe, to the Rolla Nordic Tarot from back in the 80s. It was a simple black line drawing on white background. It is, I believe, out of print, and so, it'd be really hard to get this deck now at a reasonable price. But you don't have to, because the Inversion Tarot is very similar. And it's, in a tin, and it's one of the decks that's like probably under $20. It's white lines on black. Rather, that's why it's called the Inversion, because it's the opposite of the Rolla Nordic. There are some differences between the two decks, although they are extremely similar. And I have done a side-by-side comparison between these two decks somewhere else in my playlist. And if you're interested in seeing each of these cards and how they compare to one another, go find that one. That would be a good one to look at. The reason that I'm using this deck today is to show that you don't have to spend a whole lot of money, to have, to be a tarot reader. I have probably 300 decks. Why do I have so many decks? I'm a reader, I'm a collector, and I'm a reader. But my heart is in, reading. I think what happened with me was, and why I have so many decks, is because, especially, when I started learning, I always read from non-scenic pips, right? I started with the 1JJ Swiss, in 1975 or 1976, and there was not a whole lot of material, in suburban Philadelphia where I grew up, that had information on non-scenic pips or even TDM style, right? The rage at that point, the influx to American shores regarding tarot was the Rider-Waite-Smith. In those days it was called Rider-Waite-Smith. Now we call it the Waite-Coleman-Smith, right? That was the deck. And so all the literature that was out, pertained to that deck. Now, it's different if you were in Europe, because in Europe, TDM was the norm, or the Italian decks were the norm. But in America, that wasn't the case. And so I, basically learned about tarot more from learning about architecture of the Middle Ages and the Renaissance, and church, iconography from that period of time, and just like, history, and because the non-scenic pip cards don't have images, I kind of felt it was a natural thing for me to try to combine number with suit, right? I mean, I didn't learn that process from anyone at that time, but it was the only thing that made sense to me. I had to figure out, I had to learn to figure out what like 6 hearts might have, 6 cups might have meant, because I couldn't find the stuff. Now it's all over the place, but at that time it wasn't, So I came up with, my system of what numbers meant and then applying it to the suit. And the same could be said about, about spreads, right? The only spread that was, that I even heard about was the Celtic cross spread, which I believe Edward Arthur Waite developed, in unison or in combination with the deck he created with Pamela Coleman Smith. So they produced the deck and they released the deck, and then they had a spread that people could use, in order to use their deck. I had learned that I believe it was Oswald Worth came out with the Tirage and Qua, which was also like a cross configuration spread. And those two spreads are spreads that have been around forever and people use them all the time. But I found that they weren't really, they were good, but they weren't ultimately useful, for me. Or my brain didn't think that way, especially with the Celtic cross spread. I use the Tirage and Qua spread, probably, quite often, especially when someone has limited funds and they want a brief reading. The Tirage and Qua is a 5-card spread, so it's easy to do that reading for someone and not charge them a lot of money. But the Celtic cross, the way I used it, I ended up having to almost recreate, all the positional meanings to make better sense for me. And then it ended up that, I ultimately didn't feel like it was a useful spread. So then I started just reading, spreads on my own. In fact, I wanted to share this with you. I created this little golden book, I guess in the 80s, or I don't know, I guess in the 90s when I had a typewriter. And I started just creating my own spreads, right? Now you'll notice that these are written, with positional meanings, like what one position means and another. And I made a whole mess of them, right? I just used a bunch of them. So I started making these spreads that I found to be very useful in different circumstances and different, But then what I started to realize was that it was just, I needed something I needed to understand the cards in a better way so that I wasn't looking at positional meanings constantly, right? I needed to be able to just lay the cards and know what they meant, rather than this card means this and this positional card means that and this one means that too. And so that's how I came up with the spread that I, call my signature spread. It's important, I believe, that you give yourself permission to be the authority. You don't need to copy or use anyone else's spread unless you find it really helpful and useful to you. Then by all means, use it. But you have to give yourself permission to realize that you don't have to use the Celtic cross. You don't have to use the Tirage and Qua. You don't have to use any other spread that you've ever seen in any book to have a meaningful understanding of the cards, right? Now, I like doing, and if you've watched my videos now for, a number of times, you know what I like. I like the 3 rows of 3, which is probably something a lot of people do. And the way I've made it uniquely my own is that I've added the quintessential card for each row, which adds 3 additional cards, right? And then I do a quintessential card for all of the cards present. And I'm not going to do all that right now, but I'll add an additional 3, and then a fourth. So it'd be a bulk of 9 plus the sidebar of 3 and 1. And if you want to catch that, you can watch you can watch my videos, my other videos, because I've used it a number of times. But when I started, experimenting and leaving my little golden book, the security of my little golden book, which adhered to positional meanings, I started to just use blocks, chunks. I probably started with like 3 rows of 2 rows of 3. Maybe sometimes I might have experimented with 4 rows of 4. But I ultimately, decided to use 3 rows of 3 because it offered a whole lot of insight that positional meanings don't. Now, when I've been doing my readings on video and I've been, showing you guys how I do things, I haven't shown you everything, I've pretty much, stated that the blocks of 3 rows of 3 is very helpful because sometimes people will have maybe, 3 questions that are part of the greater question. So you could designate each row to answer or to satisfy each of 3 aspects of a question. And, that's pretty simple, right? Each card in the row have no positional meaning. And the row themselves has a general positional meaning, but it's kind of fluid. And, you don't have to start in any particular spot, right? What I haven't shown, because when you're teaching, and I am a teacher, right? When you're teaching and you're instructing, you start out, with pieces, and then as your students are hungry for more, then you release more information, right? So in addition to, interpreting or assigning each row of 3 to answer an aspect of a question, you're going to see that you're going to have, the more you do it, you're going to have other patterns, right? You have corners, right? Now, the corners can represent something. What are corners? Well, to me, corners mean cornerstone or foundation, right? Cornerstones are corners. And, oftentimes the integrity of something has to do with the strength in the joints that are corners. So in addition to reading 3 rows of 3, you can also start looking and paying attention to the corners. Or if there's more than 3 questions that are a part of, a person's overall question, the corners can represent, a 4th aspect. Now, the way I interpret the corners usually is, what can the person do to strengthen their cause or strengthen the likelihood of a better possible outcome? Or sometimes the corners will reveal a weakness, It becomes clear what the case is once you get involved with the interpretations. You'll know if it's a strength or if it's a weakness, just by virtue of doing the reading and the dynamics. Okay, so the corners are in addition to 3 rows of 3. Another relationship that you might start noticing, and you'll probably, are diagonals, right? Sometimes, you're just, I'm just struck by 3 cards in a row, which just demand your attention, right? And it could be this way or this way. And so sometimes, depending on what the cards are and what the question is, I'm struck more by the pattern that's created by the diagonals than, maybe what the cards are themselves, right? And then also, and I've touched on this a bit with my other videos, what falls above or below another card. For example, in this center row, we have all cups, right? So, in the center of whatever fictitious question this was, and I didn't even have one, You know, I didn't even have that when I was talking to you and laying the cards. There was no fictitious anything. But, you know, if I were to see this, you know, right off the bat, I would think the crux or the center issue is an emotional one, right? So you just, you know, you just see that pattern, right? And you begin to just see patterns in the cards and the way they're laid out. And they just begin to speak to you in a way that you understand their fluidity, you know. I I think I've you know, said everything I set out to say for this video. Just give yourself permission to do things, you know. Even if, you know, if three rows of 3 is overwhelming, you know, or 4 rows of 4 is overwhelming. And I ultimately chose 3 rows of 3 because I like, somebody else, Natasha, pointed it out, but she's right, you know, this is precisely right. You know, I like the 3, 6, 9, you know, thing. You know, I kind of like that, you know, that dynamic with 3 rows of 3, you know. But I think when I started experimenting and doing it, I probably was doing, you know, 2 rows of 3. And then I started seeing patterns just like, you know, in the corners or patterns in, you know, next to each other or up and down, right? And then you just start seeing your own patterns, and you just begin to naturally make sense of what you're seeing. So give yourselves permission. Make your own spreads. Take something that you saw from somebody else and put it in yours and make it yours. Ultimately, right, you have to be comfortable in interpreting the cards, right? If you're forcing yourself to use a Celtic cross spread or another spread that you saw somewhere and it's not you, it's never going to gel, and you know, you're never going to feel comfortable. And you know, although the reading that you're doing, if someone's paying you, right, or if someone comes to you to do a reading, your objective is to interpret the cards on there for them, right? So the information you receive or the way that you understand the cards is not for your benefit, it's for theirs. And so, you know, you're interpreting the cards to have meaning for your client. But in order to do that, you have to be comfortable with what you're doing, right? You have to give yourself permission to say, you know what, I'm the authority here, and this is how I want to lay the cards, and this is how I'm going to understand the cards. And if, you know, it's helpful to you to make your own little golden book, you know, and you start out in position 1 means this and position 4 means that, you know, do it, right? And then at some point, you know, you'll evolve. You know, I haven't opened that book probably in 20 years, you know, but at some point, you know, you realize you don't need that because the cards speak for themselves. But to get there, it sometimes helps to go through your own stages of what makes sense to you. And finally, you'll understand, you know, how to use the cards without worrying, you know, that it's a legitimate spread, you know, or that it's, you know, you are the authority, in other words, right? So I hope this video has been helpful to you. And until next time, friends, peace and stay well.